What happens when education stops forming people and starts optimizing them? In a world obsessed with efficiency and metrics and outcomes and techniques for almost everything, we are at risk of losing sight of what it means to be truly human and what success should look like when it comes to educating our children. Today, Josh Pauling joins us to challenge the modern assumptions about school and success and formation as it impacts our homes and schools. All this and more on this episode of BaseCamp Live.
Mountains. We all face them as we seek to influence the next generation. Get equipped to conquer the challenges, summit the peak, and shape exceptionally thoughtful, compassionate, and flourishing human beings. We call it Ancient Future Education for raising the next generation. Welcome to BaseCamp Live. Now your host, Davies Owens.
Welcome to another episode of BaseCamp Live. Davies Owens, your host, here with you on the journey of raising the next generation. Almost an entire decade now of having these podcast conversations. As always, it's a joy to hear from you wherever you may be listening from. Drop me an email, info@basecamplive.com. There are so many amazing schools that are out there across the U.S. and across the world today in all different forms, from 5-day brick and mortar to online classical to combinations of hybrid and collaborative homeschooling. It's clear that there is a huge desire right now to do things a little bit differently. And we often quote Lewis when he says that when we've lost our way, the fastest way home is to turn and go back from the direction from which you have come, which in the case of education is to go back to classical Christian education, which is the way most everyone was educated in the West up until about 100 years ago. So that's what we do. We have these conversations about what's happening in the world of the culture around us as it pertains to education and raising the next generation. In this particular episode, I want to, as always, give a quick shout out to a couple of folks. So good to hear from so many of you who listen faithfully every week, including the folks at the Legacy Classical Christian Academy in Hazlet, Texas. Belinda Henson is head of school there, as well as the Ambrose School's Bridge campus in Garden City, Idaho, where Mandy Moore is the head of school. We are so grateful for both of your schools, for your parents, for your teachers, for everyone who participates each week in listening to BaseCamp Live and being a part of the Zipcast community as well. This particular episode, I have the joy of sitting down with Josh Pauling. Josh is the headmaster of the All Saints Classical Academy and vicar of All Saints Lutheran Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. He is the author of Education's End and a co-author with Robin Phillips, and they wrote the book together, Are We All Cyborgs Now? Josh has taught and coached for 13 years in public schools prior to moving into classical education. He has studied at Messiah College, Reformed Theological Seminary, Winthrop University, and Concordia Theological Seminary. He's also written for Circe, Classis, The Front Porch Republic, Mere Orthodoxy, Public Discourse, Touchstone, and is a frequent guest on Issues, etc. This particular conversation about the tyranny of technique was originally in the form of an article that he wrote in the ACCS Classis magazine, which you can find in our show notes, or go check out classicalchristian.org. This particular episode is brought to you by a number of very important partners that we look to help us as we go about this journey of raising the next generation. Wilson Hill Academy has a fantastic online classical school option for you to check out, as well as our friends at the Herzog Foundation, which is an amazing organization that offers free coaching to school leaders all around the country. Life Architects Coaching is another great resource if you're looking for helping the next generation find their way through aptitude testing and being able to understand vocational discipleship, as well as our own team at Zipcast. We have many schools that are continuing to sign up even this spring as they get ready to join us in full force in the fall with the Zipcast communication platform. And finally, a big shout out and thank you to Robert Littlejohn and Chuck Evans and the work that they're doing in Wisdom and Eloquence, which is a great resource for parents. All that and more you can check out on our partners page. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Josh. Josh, welcome to BaseCamp Live.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Well, I'm excited to have a conversation with you. As we get started, give folks a little sense of the journey that you are on, both in just your understanding of classical Christian and now this exciting venture you're taking on of starting a school. Tell us more.
Yeah, thanks. So I've got a long history in education. Both my parents were public educators. My wife and I were public educators as well. I was a high school history teacher and cross-country coach and baseball coach, the classic history teacher trade, right?
Yeah.
And I did that for 13 years in a very diverse public school. It was a Title I school, which means there's lots of poverty and so forth. Loved teaching there. I loved the classroom. But, as you're in a progressive behemoth like that, you just start to realize things about education that you were never told in your educational training. And so I started to discover classical education through reading, through a lot of books and friends, and started to really come to see the beauty of it. And so I eventually resigned from teaching in public schools in 2021, got involved in some classical co-ops where I've been tutoring high schoolers, especially seniors in their thesis writing and so forth since then, and been doing some writing on culture and theology. I've got a background in sort of seminary education. And now we're at our church launching a classical hybrid school, fall of 26 in Charlotte, North Carolina. All Saints Classical Academy will be opening its doors, Lord willing, with grades K through 4th. And we're so excited about the project. It's such an exciting time in education. There's lots of disruption, lots of innovation. And parents are really looking for something that, threads the needle where they can have a strong family culture and also benefit from the excellence of sort of a private education. And that's what the hybrid model, I think, can do well. So we're really excited.
Love to hear this. And collaborative is for sure the fastest growing segment within the overall growth of classical Christian education. Share with folks just briefly, given your role as a vicar there at All Saints and the role of the Lutheran denomination historically has been very tied to classical. I mean, it's not a new thing. It's really a kind of a renewal movement going on, as I understand it.
Yes, great point. So Lutheranism has a long history of having parochial schools and classical in that regard. Luther and Melanchthon during the Reformation were really reclaiming classical education in the universities and in the schools in towns and cities across Germany. Melanchthon gets the nickname the teacher of Germany because of this. And they were really reclaiming, right? Ad fontes was a big part of the Renaissance and Reformation. And so Lutheranism has that long history. In the 1900s, as with a lot of other denominations and just cultural shifts, we sort of lost that for a time as we sort of imbibed progressive methodologies and stuff. But there's really in the last 30 years, as the broader, classical education movement, Lutheranism has been mirroring that in many ways. We've got some great organizations like the CCLE. Gene Veith has been a big voice in this. All across the country, there's Lutheran churches that are either reopening their schools or making their schools more classical, or in some cases opening new schools. So it's really exciting. I'll just give you one little tidbit to show how central this was to Lutheranism in America. When Germans came over in the 1800s and started the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which is the denomination I'm a part of the original Constitution said that to start a church, you had to start a school.
Wow.
And so the growth of churches in America within the LCMS mirrors the growth of schools. Like the first few years, they had like 15 churches and 15 schools. And then in 10 years, it was like 90 churches and 89 schools. And 20 years, it was just a rapid era of growth in church growth and also school growth. So that's really cool. And it's a beautiful picture, right?
It truly is.
You have the family and the church and the school all working together,
That three-legged stool, as we talk about
that's
so
right.
often. It really, and that's the first time I've heard that specific historical data point, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think, we see that more and more now where schools are being started by churches. And I think it's taken some time, especially in the Protestant tradition, to recognize that is, I think finally most Protestants are discovering the salt and light model of putting your kids in the government schools probably not as reasonable as it might have been 20, 30 years ago. And so let's maybe turn the empty church building into a school could be a good stewardship opportunity. But it sounds like Lutherans were way ahead on this. So well done. And I'm glad you guys continue to champion that model. Sounds great.
Thanks.
Well, I want to jump into this article that you wrote in Classes entitled Avoiding the Tyranny of Technique in the Classroom. It really working off of Jacques Ellul's warning to education. And this is just such a timely article. And I thought I definitely want to have you bring this idea to light for us because, we swim in technical waters. I always say we're not anti-technology. I've worked in Silicon Valley. I'm running a tech company right now. But sometimes the water that we swim in is the fish. We just don't even realize how much it's affecting us. So just kind of set up set up the problem. What are the concerns you see that prompted the writing of the article?
Yeah, sure. So Lowell's idea of technique, if I could just give a definition here, it's a very broad definition of technique. He says it's the totality of methods rationally arrived at and having absolute efficiency in every field of human activity. So that's his definition of technique. And he was concerned in the 50s that this was coming to define every realm of life, the home, politics, school, religion, right? That metric of technique and efficiency was coming to steamroll everything else, right? Mm-hmm. And my concern in writing the article is that it's very easy for that to bleed into our way of thinking about education, even classical education, especially as it gets bigger, right? As a movement and as schools grow, the desire for efficiency and technique and scalability and things like that sometimes start to sort of creep into our way of thinking in a way that makes us start to think of the school in a mechanistic way or in a factory way again, which is what we were trying to get away from in the first
right.
place.
It's a very pervasive problem. Before just so everybody's kind of on the same page, so Jacques Ellul, sounds like he's French. He would be theologian, sociologist. He is often cited for his early observations of some of the challenges of technology and propaganda. So maybe just a comment or two more about who this guy was.
Sure. Perfect. Yeah. Fascinating thinker from this mid-20th century era where there's a lot of great thinkers that were sort of seeing the effects of the world wars, right? And what that was doing to society, the effects of industrialization and urbanization. And Ellul is an interesting combination. He's thinking of this theologically, sociologically, and legally as well. He was a legal scholar too. So you put all these things together and you really have an interdisciplinarian approach to this, right? Sounds pretty classical. And he wrote The Technological Society. This is probably his most well-known book. It's very long and dense, but there's lots of great nuggets in there. Just an interesting note on that, the French title was La Technique. And when it got translated into English, they went with Technological Society, which I think loses a little bit of his point. His point wasn't a specific device or technology. His point was much bigger, that technique and efficiency were coming to rule everything else. He also has some great books on the city, the development of the city in history, propaganda, as you said as well, and several books on technology. So he's part of that larger philosophy of technology tradition, we'd say, right? People like Lewis Mumford, Martin Heidegger, Neil Postman. Ellul's a key figure in that trajectory.
And what's so important about what he's bringing to light that you've really illuminated for us is that I think in general, we talk a lot about technology in the sense of smartphones for kids, and we quote Jonathan Haidt, and of course all of that needs to be discussed, but this is at a much more, maybe more dangerous and subtle level. And you're talking about things that they actually just seem all American. Like, oh my goodness, what's wrong with efficiency and optimization and productivity? Isn't this good? I mean, why wouldn't we want this? And yet it's got a very dark side to it. So again, unpack that a little bit, especially as we think about it in our homes and our schools. What does that really look like?
Yeah, great. So what does that really look like? Well, it looks like more than just saying, let's not have devices in the classroom, or let's put our smartphone in a bin or whatever else. Although there's a place for those things, of course. It actually causes us to think much more deeply, right? As you said, to these more subtle ways that we're imbibing at the fountain of pragmatism or utilitarianism, like the only American contributions to the philosophical tradition. And this sort of self-help model mindset as well that maybe we could talk about at some point here. That sort of fits into this too, right? We try to optimize ourselves, right? If you have struggle with your weight, well, download this app and try to optimize this, right? If you have this struggle, well, then do this, follow these steps, right? It's interesting, that whole self-help movement is seeing a little bit of a shift. Tim Ferriss, one of the technique gurus of the last several years, is now talking about finding peace and relaxation in being enough. He recently published something called The Self-Help Trap, right? And he's talking about the wisdom of subtraction. So it's interesting to see that develop. And that would be something Ellul would say, sort of, I told you so, right? That's going to come at some point. You just exhaust yourself, right? You cannot live this way. It's not because efficiency is bad or technique is bad. It's because they're not the highest human goods, right? And that's really, Ellul's point, that we're applying the machine template, the efficiency template, to human beings, human relationships, human activities, human capacities, and capabilities. And when you do that, you just eventually burn yourself out, because we're not machines.
And yet it's still so it's so integrated in what our value system is that we pride ourselves on being able to multitask, and
Yes.
it's all about finding that edge, the business edge on that extra 5 minutes you've gained because now you can get an AI to do your email, so you can gain 10 more minutes back. I mean, everything is it's just the modern promises from the day I guess the first washing machine rolled out that we're going to the efficiency. Now you can do more things, which
Sure.
But it's interesting because I think we are hitting more and more awarenesses as you're talking about. I think there's more of a desire for kind of the analog life. I keep hearing that even the last 6 months.
Sure.
But again, just to unpack it a little bit more, when it comes to things like the assumptions of a school and a classroom,
Sure.
I mean, and I think I've heard you talk about this. If you sort of the insanity of thinking, well, let's evaluate this particular student's proficiency in studying history, and they got an 88% on the test.
Sure.
I mean, what's wrong with that? That's just what we're all used to, right?
Yeah, great. Okay, so now we did big picture. Now let's get nitty gritty into the
give me some nitty gritty.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think for one, like you said, grades, right? We have this very numerical approach to grading, right? Everything's with a rubric, everything's put on a scale. And again, it's not that there's no place for such things, but how is that changing how we think about the student, right? It's almost like a test or a rubric can become a barrier between the student and the teacher, right? And that humane relationship that should be there, a relationship of trust, right? The teacher-student relationship is a very unique relationship. It's a very fragile relationship.
Yeah.
And if it's not built on trust and an actual relationship with the student, then we're starting to fall into that sort of efficiency mindset. It's more and more, it becomes easier to view the student as a number, right? So grading would be one. The day schedule would be another, right? Well, traditionally schools in the last few hundred years have used a very regimented, factory-like schedule, right, with bells and so forth. How do we, in an organized school, fight against that tendency that schedule might create, right? I'm not saying we completely get rid of schedules, but we have to recognize that schedules are nudging us in a certain way, right? A very regimented, bell-driven schedule is a nudge, right? Grading students with numbers is a nudge. And you have to realize that so that you can counteract those nudges with other practices in the classroom. So those would be a couple examples.
Those are great examples, and we'll get into some of this. So what do you do about that? But I think what I so appreciate about what you're saying and about the article is it really just calls into question things that just seem so utterly normal. Like, well, how else could you possibly do it? But you see the extremes of these things, not so much in classical schools, but larger schools where it's you're graded not only on a letter grade or a percentage, but even the process of assessing the student's learning is through a Scantron, fill out the bubbles, and it goes in a computer and kicks it out. And I think you mentioned factory. I think if you sat a modern school next to like an automobile factory, there's a lot in common there. The car comes off and somebody with a little micrometer, comes up and measures the specs of, the width between the door jamb or something. And then we use the same little percentage of accuracy on our students. So it just seems normal, I guess is what I'm saying. So what you're saying, I think we're starting to say, yeah, that doesn't sound right. But gosh, what are the real implications to our souls, not just to our, weakening of our academics?
That's right. Yeah.
And do you see? And so when you think about, we're going to take a break in a moment, but I guess I want to continue to think through what are some of those practical things that the waters that we swim in. Again, you've talked about about grading and other
grading,
things are just sort of bleeding
schedule.
into. Maybe our family life too. Where does that leach in there?
Maybe just a couple more with school, or at least one more with school. I think sometimes like a teaching technique even, right? A lesson plan template, right? Those things can become a replacement for the actual act of teaching, right? And the relationship with the student, right? If I just implement this new technique in the classroom, or if we just use this curriculum, then everything's going to be good, right? But even if you do have all the right curriculum and all the right teaching methods, right? Still, teaching is very unpredictable and it's highly inefficient, right? There's a human being on the other end and that is going to be different with each human being, right? And so that I think is another way it creeps in the school. In home life, I don't know. I'd have to think about that more. I've written a book on life in the digital age and we have a whole section on family life. But I'm not connecting the dots right now with technique.
Well,
I guess I need to work on that. What do you think?
I mean, what do you think of, I think let me reframe that question. It's maybe not just home life in isolation from school, but the way that we at home evaluate what success at school is. It's the, the questions we ask sometimes are very derivative of this idea that it's a technique. It's what grade did you get, and as opposed to what ideas are you actually learning. So those are
yes. It's not so much about the love of learning, right?
Right.
It's the checking of the boxes, right? The grading, assignments, right? Yeah.
To the point of just insanity. I've got a good friend who I won't, a head of school at a large school, and he was telling me sort of this recently a challenge. Last spring he was going through a real challenge where they had two candidates for valedictorian status, and the variance was literally like at a 0.1 percentile of a grade number, and the amount of angst that it was causing between these two parents, or the parents of the two individuals that were up and running. And you just think, gosh, this is the culmination of your child's education, and you're fighting over a 0.1% variant. Again, what are we doing? And I think this is where our homes are, our understanding as parents of what school should even be is so often tainted by the technique and the value for technique.
What a powerful example, right? Like you said, this should be an exciting, full example, right? Like you said, this should be an exciting moment of celebration, and instead it's just covered with anxiety and stress over a fraction of a point. That's efficiency for you, right?
That's the worst kind of way, right?
In the worst kind of way, yeah. So there's got to be sort of a rehumanized approach to how we think about evaluating students, for sure. And part of that is, like you said, how the home interacts with the school and how parents interact with their children, and also model what lifelong learning looks like. I think that's a huge part of it, right? Can students see their parents reading, learning, being excited about new discoveries, right? Sharing quotes from the things they're reading in the evening, things like that, I think can really go a long way in making sure that students are developing that, intrinsic motivation and love of learning. Yeah.
That's a great point. Well, let's take a break. I want to come back because you're getting into the areas I want to really delve into, which is what do we do to actually make a classroom truly about forming people, not just informing them? How do we really create a currency that we trade in that's something that's other than just technical expertise? So it's a big question, and it's something I know you've thought a lot about. Let's take a quick break and we'll come back and continue the conversation.
Hi there, classical Christian parents, students, and teachers. This is Robert Littlejohn, co-author with Charles Evans of Wisdom and Eloquence, a Christian paradigm for classical learning, published by Crossway Books. We want you to know about our new book with well-known family counselor Keith McCurdy, published by Classical Academic Press. The book is titled Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents: How Classical Christian Education Can Transform Your Children, Your Family, and the World. We have written this shorter, parent-focused book specifically as an admissions and parent education resource for schools and families. We are excited to be proud sponsors of Sipcast and BaseCamp Live, and we hope you are enjoying these two great resources for classical learning as much as we are. And we would invite you to visit our website, wisdomandeloquence.org, to explore the various services offered by the authors of Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents, and to let us know how we can best serve you. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Today's episode of BaseCamp Live is brought to you by my friend Chris Casper, who you heard on a recent episode. His invention, the Wise Phone, is a much-needed third way, providing a solution from the dangers of a smartphone on the one hand and the limited capacities of an old-school flip phone on the other. His simple, distraction-free phone design for families who want technology to serve their real lives and give us and our older children a way to do basic essentials like calling or texting or maps without the web browser and the social media and the endless apps that can pull them and us into the addictive time-wasting aspects of a smartphone. I personally have a Wise Phone, and I can vouch that it is an excellent solution and an appropriate way to use technology that supports virtue and focus and healthy habits. Check out the link in our show notes and on our BaseCamp Live website partners page, where Chris is offering BaseCamp Live listeners a discount. Josh, the advantage you have right now of starting a school is you get to try to put many of these ideas into practice and do things a little bit differently. And I think for most of us, as we talked about before the break, are in schools that, without even realizing it, have fallen into the technique ditch, and things are too often about grades or too often about evaluating things in very mechanistic ways. What are some positive things that you're trying to set in motion to make sure that the school as you're envisioning it is a little bit less technique oriented?
Oh man, this is what's so exciting. Like you said, starting a school, it's daunting, right? But it's
Yeah.
it's like a culmination of so many things. It's just so exciting. So we're going to do quite a few things different. Obviously there's still going to be a schedule and all that. But as far as the schedule of the day, one is we've just realized that there's a lot of trade-offs. Like if we want to have a restful approach, then maybe we're not going to be able to do all the subjects all the time, right? And in our hybrid model, right, we have some flexibility there to do that. So, for example, grades K through 2 is not going to be a full day. That's going to be from 9 to 1, right? So that they can have a more restful approach and have more time at home with family and so forth, right? Then grades 3 and up will be the full day, like 9 to 3, 8:30 to 3. So that's one thing with the structure of the day. Another thing with the structure of the day is we're not going to use bells. We're going to use songs, right? When it's time to transition, we're going to start singing certain songs. And we've seen this at some other Lutheran schools, and it's just beautiful, right? They hear the song and they start singing it, and they know that it's time to move to the next thing, right? What a more humane way to move around, right? To beautiful hymns and folk songs, right? So we're going to do that. We're also going to have a little.
Is this over the PA system? I'm just trying to envision how this works. I mean,
we're a very small building, so basically, we're just going to go out in the hallway.
You can stand and sing in the hallway, and people know.
That's right.
I love it.
Yep. Good question.
Beautiful.
Yeah. We're also going to have a little bit of flexibility with when we change classes, right? If something's really going well, you don't want to kill the discussion, right? Even when I was in public schools, I always told my students that I dismiss the class, the bell does not, right? And that was something they had to learn, right? But if there was a minute or two more of something meaningful happening, we kept going. And then we dismissed, and they still had plenty of time to get to their next class, right? So we're going to try to have a little bit of flexibility there. There'll be certain times during the day where we really have to hit the time, right? But we can be a little flexible, right? We're small, so obviously there's some benefits of being small in that regard.
Yeah.
So that's some things about the structure of the school day we're trying to do. As far as evaluating students, especially with the younger grades, there's no need for number grades, right? There's a long tradition of using things like cum laude, satis, satisfactory, right? Non-satisfactory. So we're going to sort of use a mastery approach in the younger levels as far as how we evaluate. There's going to be a lot of oral exams, a lot of narration, right? Narration is a great technique. It's very elegant because what you're doing is you're seeing if it's an informal assessment, right? In the sense you're seeing if they're actually processing and learning the material you're sharing, but you're also evaluating many other things at the same time. Right? Reading comprehension, writing. There's a little bit of grammar, logic, rhetoric in there, right? They've got to create their own little narration paragraph, even as young students, right? So it's just a very versatile technique. There's lots of sort of new books on this as we're recovering more and more of the tradition, the benefits of narration. Obviously, Charlotte Mason, that's a big thing. Beautiful Teaching is putting some great stuff out on this. So we're trying to have that sort of slower, beautiful approach in our evaluation of students, a very humane approach, especially in the younger years. Also, we're going to have a lot of classroom liturgies. How we begin class and end class can help us have that more restful approach to learning. So at the end of a class, if we're going to try to avoid that technique and efficiency mindset, maybe there's a minute of silence, right, that ends with a prayer. Something that encourages students to ponder, to slow down, to reflect. Those are exciting things to really form as we're building our school culture, right? Those liturgies at the beginning and the end of class.
I find it almost humorous that in the sense that we're actually trying to think of ways to help our children be a little bored in school, because there's a little bit of a loss of, just as you're saying. I love that, taking some moments at the end just for contemplation and stopping and reflecting. And that's not the case in our modern world, certainly in the modern school. So it might. This
is another one I'm throwing out there.
Yeah,
and
please.
I'd be interesting, just real quick, to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
So, we're going to have clocks in the room, but I've also thought about having little hourglasses that maybe have like a 5-minute or a 10-minute range or something, or marks on it, just as another way for certain activities to mark time in sort of a slower way. I don't know. It might be fun to have
I think
that.
It's a great idea. I think it would certainly add a nice classical feel to it. But I think you're right. I think the tyranny of the urge. I mean, how often most of us, I'm sure, remember the big white round clock that was right there above the board that, with the second hand, and you're literally just counting seconds, sitting there staring at this thing. So it doesn't.
Right in the front of the room.
In the front of the room. Like, what does that even do for you in terms of that sense of efficiency and time? But I think you're right. I think we've got to rewire the Pavlovian dogs that jump every time they hear the bell and run out into the hallway and say, especially when those living conversations often happen right in the last 10 minutes. And it's like, hold on, don't kill it off. Those are really good ideas. How about with regard to assessment? How are you going to approach it differently?
Yeah. So part of that is going to be a lot of oral assessments and formative assessments throughout each day. As I said, in the younger levels, a lot of that's going to be narration-based and dictation-based. As students get older, though, certainly we do need to do more grading, right? That's part of the reality. As students age, that becomes more necessary and appropriate. So as students get older, especially 9 through 12, then we'll probably move to numerical grades. And along the way, even in elementary school, it's important to have various benchmarks and comparisons, if you will. That's especially important in our desire to make sure students are learning and hitting the marks they should. So there's a place for that. Just not as much as it's become prominent in the progressive system. When I was teaching in the public schools, my goodness, the amount of school days we spent on standardized tests, it was just ballooning, getting bigger and bigger each year. And we just lost so much instructional time. But anyway, so I'll just give an example with my own daughters, since this is what we're doing with them, and they're a little bit older than the students that will be starting in our school. We've done the National Latin exam for them for several years, and we've also done some of the CLT exams for younger students. They're in 10th grade and 8th grade right now, so we're sort of moving through that as we speak. But that's sort of been our approach. They need to know how to take standardized tests. We want to see how they're doing compared to sort of the national numbers, and there's a place for that as long as we keep it in a specific lane, right? And we talk with them about that. There'll be things on this test that you've probably not learned, and that's okay. Don't get upset, right? This is a test just to see where you're at, right? And to take it, to sort of put it in a more humane lane, but still see the place for it, especially as we consider college and things like that.
Yeah. And as you think about that more relational aspect of learning, you talked about oral testing, which I know can be challenging if you have a very large school. But if the school can manage that, it's certainly, I mean, this again, you can reflect a little bit on the history of this. But again, if we went back to an Oxford or Cambridge 150 years ago, there were no standardized test. It would have been probably spending time in a conversation with your tutor, your professor, who would have rightly known whether you had understood the material. So that is,
exactly.
I guess, part of it.
It's much more direct. And again, we're small, so maybe we have a little more flexibility to implement such a thing. But it's very direct, very humane. And it also gives you a much truer measure than the multiple choice test, right? The multiple choice test, you can have students who get things right that they don't really know, and students that get things wrong that actually really know the subject, right? But just were tricked by a distractor or whatever else. Right. So that more direct way of interacting, right, is really important. Also, essay tests are another way to do this. We'll certainly do some of that as well. Yeah.
I was reading recently, especially with the worries, the rightful concerns of AI writing papers these days. I mean, more and more schools are going back to the old blue books and a prompt on the board and grab your pencil and start writing. So there's ways to reintroduce.
Yeah, I've been using those with my, I do some teaching for seniors at a classical co-op, and I've been doing blue books with them for a while for their midterm and final.
Yeah, which is a great way just to assess and connect. Very good. Other things that you're doing in the life of the school that just set it apart as a sort of, again, a non-technique school, if that's a term.
Well, we're going to be very tech minimal. And that's going to help us avoid techniques, right? Because many of our techniques are connected to our technological devices, right? So that's going to be a very intentional aspect of our school. This has been a passion of mine for 20 years or more. I was seeing the effects of digital devices in the classroom as they were rolled out one after the other in my public school classroom. I taught before the smartphone and after the smartphone and was seeing all those effects. And so we're going to be very intentional in our approach to this, not because technology is bad, but because we want to develop human capacities and abilities in the best way possible, right? And the data is accumulating here. The receipts are piling up. My goodness. Obviously, you already mentioned some of people like Jonathan Haidt and so forth, but there's Jared Horvath wrote this recent book, Digital Delusions, which specifically looks more at educational technology and the false promises that have been made there, and how that really is the data now is showing that more and more. And most teachers knew this, right? They intuitively knew that something wasn't right when everybody had Chromebooks and all of a sudden weren't able to write essays, right? We just didn't use them in my class. We stuck with pen and paper. And I collected phones long before that was the cool thing to do. I was the only one doing it in my school. And that was the best decision I ever made. Those types of things now it's like an "I told you so" moment a little bit, right?
Right.
Which it's good. It's exciting that there's a tide moving on these things, but that's going to be very intentional for us to be a tech minimal school.
How does that apply for the guidance you provide families for after school hours? On BaseCamp Live, I often use the term the 301 problem, because we can be very purposeful in defining what the school day looks like, but then if we don't offer guidance at home, students could potentially be on a device for more time than would be healthy. So how much direct advice and guidance do you give to families?
Oh, great question. And that's, I would say, maybe even more important with a hybrid model, right? Where 2 or 3 of the days of the week, they're also at home, right? Getting instruction.
Yeah.
So this is something that we're going to do a lot of sort of parent formation on, family formation on. Our application process is also pretty rigorous, right? We ask a lot of very pointed questions. Are you willing to make intentional decisions in your home life that might require you to change what you're currently doing to help your student love what is lovely and true and good, right? That's really, has to be part of the conversation. So we're going to require some of that training for parents. We're going to ask them to make sacrifices for the good of themselves and their children. We're going to really utilize the Postman Pledge as a template. This is a great development by Mrs. Schindler. I'm drawing a blank on her first name right now. But David Schindler and his wife have been working on this for a while. It's a simple pledge that families can make to have a more tech minimal life and to replace those technologies with humane activities, right? Things that they're doing in person with one another, going on hikes, having picnics, going to dances and feasts and things like that. And we're also going to host some of those events at our school, right? To provide those sort of phone-free events to give students a taste of this, right? Because that's another part of it, is we need to build up a reservoir of real life experiences for families and students so that they're not as tempted by the allure of the digital device, right? Because at first the screen is going to be more attractive, right? It's brighter colors, it's hyper reality. But if we can start to change those tastes and redirect them and refine those instincts, we're going to be at a better place.
That's so good, Josh. I want to take a break, and when we come back, I want to get into a bit more of how you are creating those more beautiful spaces. And I think that's exactly the right direction to head into. I often think of, our children are very, very malleable, and you think about it in the food world. If you only put a bowl of Fruit Loops in front of your kids, they think that's normal food. If you put a steak and broccoli in front of them, they might think that's normal food, and they would create a formed appetite in those particular directions. So I'm curious sort of more of what you're doing at school and advice you have for us at home. Let's take another break and we'll be right back.
The road to graduation begins early and takes many paths. And without a skilled guide, it can feel overwhelming. The career coaches at Life Architects empower students to discover who God created them to be through our unique vocational discipleship model. You can bring this graduation game changer to your school through one-on-one student coaching, on-campus workshops, or even faculty training. Visit lifearchitectscoaching.com today.
During this short break, I have a special invitation to all school leaders, administrators, and teachers. I want you to imagine for a moment stepping away from your everyday routine at school and diving deep into the rich foundations of Christian education, surrounded by world-class scholars, seasoned classroom teachers, and administrative experts with years of experience running schools with a lot of wisdom to share. That's exactly what the Herzog Foundation's Institute is offering. I've had the joy of serving as a training coach for the last few years, leading their 2.5-day training on spiritual formation and another one on parent engagement. They offer close to 50 unique training events ranging from board governance to marketing to classroom best practices. They even offer a training on how to teach the great books. And the best part of all, well, thanks to the generosity of the Herzog Foundation, these training events, including lodging, are completely free for Christian educators. Institutes are located around the country in beautiful locations, including at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., and the Reagan Library in Santa Barbara. Don't miss this incredible opportunity. Check out the details at theherzogfoundation.com. Josh, there's so much that is refreshing about what you're saying, and I think all of us listening at a soulish level are saying, yes, please, can we have more of that in our personal lives, just a moment to breathe and to step away from the insanity of the modern factory world that we live in. Give us some other words of encouragement and just reflect on how can we be more intentional as parents and in bringing these ideas of not being in a, I guess, technique minded. I don't write the right term there, but What can we do to be complementary to what our schools are doing?
Yeah, great point. And I'll just start this by saying a lot of these apply to the school and the home, right? These principles can be applied to both. And so to start with, one would be to create sanctified spaces, right? Both in the school and in the home, right? In our technique-driven technological society, one way to sanctify a space is by not having screens in it, right? This is just common sense. There should be certain parts of our home, certain parts of our schools where the screens and the devices don't go, right? And again, it's not because they're bad. It's because they're attention hackers, right? They're human experience blockers, as Jonathan Haidt says. There's tons of data here that shows us that even if the phone or device is in our presence, we have this sort of brain drain that occurs because there's interruption potential, it's called, right? And that is something that we need to realize, right? So sanctify spaces, right? Find ways to create a space that's different than the sort of digital world we live in. Related to that also would be the development of barriers and thresholds, right? So think about this. What do you want the default activities of the students or your children to be, right? Whether they're at home or school. And make those default activities easier to access, right? And make the ones you don't want them to do harder to access. This is just like Atomic Habits, Habits, James Clear, right? It's just common sense. So think about that in relation to, again, what you want your kids and students to do and what you don't want them to do. And a lot of this, again, currently is going to be related to technology. That's just a reality, right? So increase the barriers to technology. Lower the barriers to board games, books, musical instruments, right? Embodied activities with one another, that type of thing. So default settings, I think, are really important in our homes. What are we making easy access to, and what are we making harder to access? Another part of this, go ahead.
I was going to say I like this idea of embodied experiences and the intentionality of it. And I think just to put a fine point on what you're saying, even for the break, just the idea of having intentional gathering where you're doing more humane activities. I mean, whether it is a board game or it is something physical, and it does wire that desire within the child for something that then for something authentic and engaging and human filling, or I guess soul filling, that then the technology hopefully becomes less attractive or less intriguing because they've tasted and seen something so much richer. So again, it's really leading with beauty. It's forming moral imagination is what you're saying. It's not just here are the vices, stay away from those things, but here's something actually more attractive to pull you towards.
Precisely. It's not about no, it's about a better yes, right?
Right.
And exposing them to the better yes so that their tastes and desires are refined and redirected. Exactly right. So just, one more thing on that.
Yeah.
Embodied practices, we might also call focal practices. This is a term that Albert Borgmann used, one of the great philosophers of technology. And a focal practice is something that requires attention and attunement of the body and the mind together, right? I think of playing a musical instrument, right? That's a focal practice. It requires that beautiful flow between the mind and the body, right? It requires expertise. It requires dexterity, all of those things. Embodied intelligence, right? And if you think about education includes many focal practices, right? And we should make sure to find ways to include more of them, right? That's why there's a great place for music in the curriculum. That's why writing is such an important skill. Writing is a focal practice, right? It requires an attunement of body and mind together. I would also say the common arts are a great way to develop focal practices. That's another thing with our academy that we're going to incorporate is common arts in the curriculum as a way to get more of those embodied experiences. So those are some other things there that would relate to what you're saying too. Yeah.
I love that you're including the common arts, because that again is where so many students just have natural desires and gifts that are not. I mean, you can certainly be a student who thrives in the academic setting, but also has great love for and propensity to go build something or complete something, and that sort of human agency that you can entrench or define that's often not there in a static tech world is so beautiful. So I love that that's part of the school. What does that look like specifically? Do common arts, where does that fit in the curriculum?
Great question. So the way we're doing it, again, as a hybrid, we have a little more flexibility here. Every 6 to 8 weeks, we're taking a break from the normal curriculum and having what we call a supplemental week, again, to encourage restful learning, right? And during those weeks, those are going to be our common arts weeks, where we might do things like woodworking and home ec. That'll also be sometimes when we do service projects, things like that. Again, to embody the curriculum, right? To extend the liberal arts into the common arts and the fine arts in ways that really connect the dots for students. We've done this also for many years. My wife and I, on our own property, we've done summer camps for kids. We call them Closer to Home, where we do home ec and shop class. One of the ways I've generated income for several years is through woodworking. I have a shop at the house and make custom furniture. So we've done some of this already. We've also done one-day workshops. And so we're going to sort of take that model and incorporate it into the school during those supplemental weeks. And then also we'll tap the expertise of our community and of our church, right? Other skills that fit into those categories of the fine arts and the common arts, will employ those as well over time.
That is so beautiful and so appealing, I think, to so many students to have those other, bringing shop class back is something that's, it's like Matthew Crawford's shop class and soul craft. You're really forming the souls while you're making a table. I mean, Jesus was a carpenter. Maybe there's a connection there. I'll figure that out later. Well, Josh, this has been really encouraging, and I love that you have this fresh opportunity to say, hey, let's just take everything we know, let's put it all on the table, let's reorganize it, and come out with a school that's truly going to be soul-filling and not just pursuing the technique as we've talked about. So for folks who are listening that want to learn more about your work and your writings, how do people connect with you?
Sure. Probably easiest way would be to go to the school website, allsaintsclassicalacademy.org. You could get a hold of me through that. I do a lot of writing for different publications. So if you were to Google my name, you'd be able to find those publications in a variety of places. I also have a couple books that I've written. One is called Are We All Cyborgs Now? Reclaiming Our Humanity from the Machine. I wrote that with a good friend, Robin Phillips. We tag team that. It's really a compilation of essays dealing with life in the digital age. We have a section on politics and technology, the home and technology, the church and technology, education and technology, really hitting all the boxes there and trying to bring to bear a classical metaphysics, a Christian worldview to the topic of life in the digital age in all those different ways. And then I have a new book coming out later this year called Education's End. It's Undoing Explained, It's Hope Reclaimed. And in that book, I really tell the story of my time in the public schools and how education really is a battleground for many of the cultural flashpoints that we face. And so I deal with a lot of the cultural issues through the lens of my classroom, and then really offer as an alternative a classical approach to education rooted in the family and in the church.
That's so encouraging. Well, we will put many of those resources that you commented on in the show notes, and I also will include the link to the Classis article on avoiding the tyranny of the technique and the classroom that we've been talking about. So thank you for all of your contributions. We'll definitely have to have you back on when the new book comes out and continue to learn from you and the great opportunities that you're creating for your students that we can all learn from. Thank you so much, Josh.
Thank you for listening to this episode of BaseCamp Live. Be sure to check out our website, basecamplive.com, for more than 8 years of timeless episodes that you'll find helpful and encouraging, as well as the helpful resources offered on our partners page. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of our partners like the Herzog Foundation. See you back next week.